Welcome to St. Louis on the Air. I'm Sarah Fenske. 3 St. Louis kids recently got a storybook ending. They are siblings, ages 7, 6, and 5. And on May 13th, they were officially adopted into a new home with a mom, a dad, and 5 more brothers and sisters. And joining us today to talk about this remarkable story is Edna Green. She's a recruiter with Wendy's Wonderful Kids. She works with the Foster and Adoptive Care Coalition in Brentwood and also the Dave Thomas Foundation for Adoption, which is a national organization. So Edna, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
And we're also joined today by Celeste Scott, and she is the new mom for these 3 St. Louis siblings, and she joins us today from her home in Oregon. Celeste, welcome.
Thank you.
And Celeste, congratulations to you on your 3 new kids. Now, you already had 5. What made you decide to add on to what most Americans would say, this is already a really big family?
Yeah, I came from a big family, and that's something that I've always wanted. And
how big
just
of a
wasn't
family?
Enough for me. There's 8 siblings in my family also.
Okay, so you've now kind of replicated the situation you grew up with.
Exactly. Yep.
So you had these 5 of your own. When did you decide, you know what, I want to begin to seriously explore adoption?
That took place, let's see, I think it was 4 years ago that we first started doing our training and everything that we had to do to make it be a possibility. It's something that I've always wanted to do, but it was something that I finally convinced my husband, I think, about 4 years ago.
He was a little more skeptical.
Yep.
So 4 years, that's a long time. I mean, is that just how long it takes, or were there some hiccups along the way?
It took long. I think it took a long time for us. We had to get certain things that we wanted. We got one of those big 12-passenger vans to make sure that we had enough room. And like I said, our training, and then we went through a private agency thinking that they would have our home study done very quickly, but it still was about a 1.5-year process to get that finished.
Okay, so there were definitely some things that took some time. But as we mentioned, at the same time, there's these 3 St. Louis kids, and they're now ages 7, 6, and 5. And a lot of people love the idea of adopting babies, kids that are a little bit older. Edna Green, I'd love for you to speak to that. Are there a lot of parents who are out there saying, yeah, I'm willing to take on a 7-year-old?
We think about the interests of our kids. When people think about adopting, they're looking for that. They want infants, and they want those babies, and they want to start right there. But we have a need for those kids that are older. Mm-hmm. There's a need for sibling groups. There's a need for adoptive homes for kids that have challenges in life. But sometimes they want the younger kids. That is true.
Mm-hmm. And you mentioned sibling groups. These 3 are a sibling group. They're all now in the same home, adopted together. Why is it important, Edna, to keep siblings together?
You touch a special place in my heart because they came and the siblings have the longest relationship. Think about it within your own unique family. I'll start with my family. My mom is deceased. And my brother and my dad is deceased, but I still have my 5 siblings with me. We were raised together in that home. We've been through milestones together in that home, and I just not in life without my siblings. And I think about that for our kids that enter foster care. They came in together. They share that trauma together. They know they have that bond there, and it's hard to hear the term sibling separation.
Mm-hmm.
I really believe that siblings belong together. Number one, just for that longevity, and just because you understand that trauma about that trauma you've been through together.
Yeah, that completely makes sense. But I imagine, as you say, sibling groups are hard. A group of 3 siblings, that's a big ask. Celeste, did you go into this saying, yeah, I want to find 3 kids?
Nope. My husband finally agreed on 1, and I knowingly, there's no way I was just going to adopt 1 kid. But I convinced him on the 2, so he started letting me look for 2. And then this sibling group came up, and I just, they were adorable. I had to submit on them, and I knew from the beginning, as soon as I talked to Edna, I knew that these kids were supposed to be ours.
So you say when they came up, were you seeing like a profile of them somewhere?
So yeah, I was looking on all of the different states' websites of the kids that they had available in their states for adoption. And I thought that once we got all of our paperwork done and all of our training done, that it would open the doors and we would see a lot more, but that wasn't the case. I think pretty much what people see is what there are, at least in my, in what happened with us. But yeah, when these kids came up on, I don't even remember what website it was, but one of them that I was looking at, then I immediately submitted on them, and then it's a lot of waiting process, waiting for someone to get back to you. Or
Now, Edna, as Celeste described there, she thought once she was through some of these hurdles that there would be a really large group of kids out there waiting for adoption. And certainly I had that impression myself, that if you're talking about kids that are not babies, that there's just thousands of kids out there waiting to be adopted. Is that not necessarily the case?
It is true. We have those sibling groups of children waiting to be adopted. But you have to really think about, there's this process called HIPAA, and you have to be sensitive to that. Also, you need to be licensed. Celeste found those kids because I was very strategic in my recruitment efforts for these children. So you have to be crafty, so to speak, when you're looking for these homes. I would always start with your state first and your local child welfare agency, and they can clue you into different places where you can find waiting children. The Heart Gallery is one for the state of Missouri. Adopt Us Kids, Adopt US Kids is another website that you can find waiting children. A Family for Every Child is where you found the children, Celeste, their short media profile. Am I correct?
I brought it to their attention. They didn't have it on their listing yet. But I do need to clarify, when we were first looking, we were looking for 2-year-olds and younger, and that's
and that's much more of a challenge, it sounds like. Okay. And so what made you decide we're going to go years older than that to be willing to take on a 7-year-old? What shifted your thinking?
Just the fact that we couldn't find kids that were 2 and younger. It was, I've been told that it takes 3 years for them to even be released as adoptable in the system. So it's almost, at least my understanding is it's almost impossible to get a 2-year-old. But our youngest biological daughter is 8 years old. And that was always like what our criteria was. They had to be younger than her. Yeah. If that makes sense.
That makes sense. And so she's then very close in age to the oldest of this sibling group. They kind of meld right together in terms of ages.
Yep. Yeah, they're 9 months apart, but they actually have become really, really close friends. So it's been awesome to see.
So that is a big part of what I wanted to ask you about. You saw them on this website and you got some information about them. You're working with Edna. How committed did you have to be to the process before you were able to actually meet them in person? I know you're coming from Oregon. That adds some complications.
Yeah, it was. It was January of 2018 that we first submitted on the kids, and it took last year, about the same time last year, that they were able to finally come out here. So it has been a long process, and yeah, we had to be at a point where we said we are planning on adopting these kids regardless of what background, what we find out when we come out to meet them.
Even before you'd met them, you had to make that commitment.
Pretty much, yeah.
So then when you finally met them, that's just got to be hard for everybody on both sides of this. Were there some challenges?
The kids were actually so excited to meet us and to be with us and to be together, because they had been in separate foster homes for, I think, about 3 years.
Oh, wow.
So, the excitement of being together was probably a lot of it, but they were so excited. They called us mom and dad from, the moment we met them. So that was an easy transition for us. It was difficult. There were a lot of difficult things along the way, but they've come a long, long way since we first met them a year ago, or a year and a half ago.
Was it hard for them to leave St. Louis, or was that not so much of an attachment for them at their age?
I'm not sure if that was hard for them to leave St. Louis. They definitely get excited when we say, hey, meet this person, they're from St. Louis, or, they get excited just hearing that somebody is from that area or that knows something that they know. But they have never acted like they've been upset to be gone from St. Louis.
And Edna, so you helped to make this placement happen. What about Celeste and her family made you think this is the right home for these three?
I really read her home study. So I read her home study. I read the family home study. I like what was in the home study. I can't recall. I think it was after my conversation when when I read the home study. I contacted her licensing worker and I asked, was this family licensed, ready to adopt a sibling group? And if they were not matched with another kid, could I have permission to talk with them? And the licensing worker said yes. And it was my conversation with Celeste. It was just her approach to parenting that struck me. I knew my kids had some challenges in life. I knew these kids had been traumatized. And I wanted to make sure that I can listen to a person describe how they parent and how they would address the situation. And I was like, this lady can meet their needs. I knew after talking to Celeste that she could meet these children's needs. She can love them. And culturally, I felt that she was competent for these children. I believe that.
Because these kids are Black and Celeste is white. Is that correct?
Yes. Yeah. So what I liked was her spirituality. Celeste falls back on her faith. And you would need that when you're working with children. And it was just how she wanted to, how she was willing to meet their needs culturally. We talked about hair care, skin care, her approach to that. I mean, all of that. And she didn't know I was going to ask these questions. She didn't know I was probing. I have to probe. I have to know that. And that lady, I tell you, and then, I fell in love. And I just fell in love with her and her family.
Well, that's just so lovely to hear, and it's so great to hear that there's somebody like you who's doing this probing. And as you said earlier, you're being crafty, like you're fixated on the idea of finding the right family for these kids. And it sounds like you're there every step of the way, making sure that they're going to get the right mom and dad.
I mean, the Dave Thomas Foundation is signature, and we met every month. We had monthly meetings, and we talked about next steps, and we talked about what's going on and how we can meet these needs. And we talked about self-care. We talked about that so much with Celeste. I know she got tired of us.
Edna made me braid her hair when I got there.
Really?
I didn't think you was going to say anything, Celeste.
Wow. So you really put her through some tests here. That's amazing. But it sounds like you two both just felt some confidence in this. And as we said, this was on May 13th that this became official. So this was just a couple weeks ago here. Celeste, this is this 4-year journey. Your husband initially said, yes, you can adopt one. You end up with 3. What was going through your mind on May 13th as the judge made this official?
It's finally here. It's been a long road.
Did you cry?
I did, yes.
Did the kids cry?
They were all asleep because it was 7 o'clock in the morning at our time.
Edna, were you able to be there for this?
I was not able to participate. No, not at all.
But that's got to feel good to know this is final. This is this.
You know what? I was so happy. I was so happy about that day. I could not. I kept texting. Is it over? Is it over? Can I call Celeste? Can I call?
I know Edna. I think Edna emailed me like 3 hours later and said, "I'm still sitting here waiting by my phone."
Oh, no. I did, Celeste. I was afraid to email because I didn't know if he was going to be talking to the judge at the time.
And Celeste, I imagine there were so many people you probably were talking to that day that it must have just felt like a whirlwind and, trying to remember to check back with who and to, let people know it's done. This is official.
Well, and it was so weird, too, because the the attorney had to call us on his cell phone and just ask the questions over his cell phone because the courtroom didn't even have the ability to make a long distance phone call to us.
Wow. These courts, they are out of date. The pandemic is putting some pressure on some institutions that do need to modernize. But wow, this is just such a happy story. And I'm so happy for these three kids. And Celeste, I'm so happy for your family. And I just want to say thank you for joining us today. It's been great to hear your story.
Thank you, Sarah.
And good luck to you and your very big family going forward.
Thank you very much.
And that was Celeste Scott, who we just spoke with. She's the Oregon woman who adopted 3 St. Louis kids on May 13th, she and her husband and their 5 other kids. And my second guest, Edna Green, is the adoption recruiter who made it all happen. And Edna, I just have a few other things I did want to talk to you about to get the bigger picture sense of things. I know your focus is on kids who are hard to place. What are some of the issues that these kids are going through now in the middle of this pandemic when everything has just sort of been thrown into chaos?
When the preparation for permanency, imagine how hard it is to continue that relationship and that serious talk about permanency and adoption during a pandemic, because those are very personal conversations. That's an in-your-face conversation with a child. Mm-hmm. And it's just really hard during a pandemic. But to me, what's important is to communicate that you still have conversation with your children, even if it means through FaceTime, Google Duo, Zoom. You still have that. You still can stay committed and connected to your children. Mm-hmm. Yes, that's huge.
Now, our producer, Emily Woodbury, she spoke to Rita Soronen, and she is the CEO of the Dave Thomas Foundation for Adoption. And here is what Rita had to say.
Children come into foster care through no fault of their own. They've been abused or neglected, and that carries layers of trauma from the abuse, from having to move multiple times, from being separated from family, going through court hearings, meeting with, multitudes of strangers. So think of that just as the baseline of being in foster care, and then add to that this COVID pandemic where children are at elevated risk because they have those layers of trauma. Their systems tend to be more susceptible to healthcare issues, and something like this can be, significant if they're exposed to the virus. But there are other issues as well. For example, imagine a child that's in a foster placement and the family is now experiencing either economic insecurity or they become ill themselves, and so the child has to move again. That puts them at risk again of just the movement and moving into another family and other circumstances.
And that's Rita Soronen. She is the CEO of the Dave Thomas Foundation for Adoption. And beyond the challenges in foster care, Rita noted that there are currently 10 children in Missouri and 5 in St. Louis who are just waiting for a judge to finalize their adoptions. And in Missouri, some jurisdictions allow in-person proceedings, but that's at the discretion of the courtroom commissioner during this whole pandemic we're in. And so Rita, who again is the CEO of the Dave Thomas Foundation for Adoption, she really wants to encourage judges to be proactive and to make these adoptions happen virtually.
We would encourage the courts to say, look, if you have a court hearing scheduled to finalize an adoption, please consider doing it via Zoom or Microsoft Teams or whatever platform you have, because what we're seeing is a smattering of judges across the nation, a smattering of courts have realized they absolutely don't have to stop the process entirely, whether it's hearings or adoption finalizations. The end result of stopping all of those for 2 or 3 or 4 or 6 months, depending on how long this goes on, is that there will be an incredible backlog of cases once the courts open back up.
And that's Rita Soronen, the CEO of the Dave Thomas Foundation for Adoption, just worried about, can these courts get back up to speed as things start to open up again? And Edna, the bigger picture is that there are so many of these older kids that are out there waiting for adoption. What happens to these kids if you can't find a family like the Scotts that's willing to take them?
The sad reality is if we're not proactive in making sure that every kid have a family. When I say a family, I mean an anchor, that person that's committed to be with this child through every life milestone. Our kids will age out of care without that safety net. Imagine not having that safety net. And to me, I look at it like this. If you know that forecast, if you know that you have a sibling group of 3 that are 10 in 5 years, and you're going to say we're not working toward any permanency, and they're going to age out of the system without no connection, without no one to love them, shame on you. We have an opportunity to be proactive and really do our best to make sure that every kid have that loved one, have that family member, have that anchor.
Mm-hmm. And in our last minute here, for people who are listening who are maybe not in a position to take on 3 kids right now or even 1 kid, but they still want to do something to help, what's one thing you could point to that we could do for kids in foster care right now?
I would always say contact your local agency and ask, can I volunteer? Can I be a mentor? Can I go through the background check? Can I foster? Maybe I don't want to be a mom, but maybe I can have the opportunity to foster a sibling. Mm-hmm. Get connected with your local agency. I'm just going to throw this out there. The Foster and Adoptive Care Coalition is willing to work with you in getting started and being a foster parent, or maybe down the line being a pre-adoptive parent.
Okay, so that's the Foster and Adoptive Care Coalition in Brentwood, which Edna works with closely. She's recommending just to get in touch and see how you can help. So, Edna Green, I want to thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you. It was my pleasure.
And Edna, again, in addition to her work with the Foster and Adoptive Care Coalition, she's also the Wendy's Wonderful Kids Recruiter, and that's through the Dave Thomas Foundation for Adoption. Also, please join us this Sunday at 3 p.m. for a special edition of St. Louis on the Air. We'll discuss the protests taking place in St. Louis and throughout the world. And we want to hear from you. How do you feel about everything that's happened recently? Leave us a voicemail at 314-516-6397. That's 314-516-NEWS. We just might play it on our show Sunday. We'll also take calls live during the show. And again, that's Sunday at 3 p.m. This is St. Louis on the Air on St. Louis Public Radio, 90.7 KWMU.
Support comes from the Missouri Forest Products Association, committed to conservation and careful management of the state's forests to make them more resilient and better habitats for wildlife. ChooseWood.com.
St. Louis Public Radio's The Gateway gives you the day's news first thing every weekday morning. From the ever-evolving relationship between St. Louis City and County to developments in the Missouri and Illinois state capitals and reports from our correspondents in Rolla and the Metro East. We put it all in a roughly 10-minute package with clarity and context. Download The Gateway wherever you get podcasts.